Welcome, welcome to the 4th annual Shabbat Together. We are so excited that we are here tonight. It is Shabbat Together is a weekend, a global weekend of disability inclusion and mental health all around the globe. So literally tonight and this weekend in hundreds of Jewish communities around the world, Shabbat Together has been celebrated and is in middle of being celebrated, where the conversation of disability inclusion and mental health are at the forefront of the discussion. And as we know, this discussion of inclusion, whether it's disability inclusion, whether it's mental health, or any kind of inclusion at all, is for sure not a weekend thing, right? It's not just a Shabbat. It's not a month thing, even though we are in the month of JDAM, which is Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month. So inclusion is something that is an everyday, all day, every minute thing. So Shabbat Together and the fact that we're coming together tonight is really just to remind each other that this is something we should be doing all the time. And our program tonight is specifically something called One Thing I Wish You Knew. And the idea is that inclusion begins with listening. So when you listen to someone share their experience or their journey and their perspective, it often doesn't matter what I think or what we think. When you listen to someone, when you really listen, your perspective starts to change and you start to understand what their experience is, what they're going through. And hopefully it makes you think, or it makes me think, or it makes us think, how can we be more supportive of that person? How can I be more supportive of my family member, of my friend, of our community? And how do we do this better as a community? How can we be more supportive of those around us and be proactive in letting people know that we are inclusive and that everyone belongs and is valuable? So our idea tonight is Shabbat Together is the chance to highlight this discussion, to talk about it. And one thing I wish you knew is our panelists are going to share their one thing I wish you knew with us tonight. Before we officially begin our program, we have a few beginning excitements. I did forget to mention one thing, so I'm going to do that now, which is we have a few accommodations on our program tonight. One is that you all see that we have an ASL, an American Sign Language interpreter, that is with us tonight, and she is on our screen, Talia Rapkin. Thank you for joining us tonight. And you can all, if for anybody who needs that, we have that available. And also, for those who are low vision, I will give a quick description of myself. I am a white female. I am sitting at my desk with a clear blank background behind me. I am wearing a black shirt. I have brownish hair that comes right to my shoulders, and I'm wearing earrings. I would like to thank for tonight our sponsor of the event, the Sheldon family. Thank you so much. They have actually sponsored the Shabbat Together for the last, I want to say 4 years. I think this is the 4th year running. So thank you to the Sheldon family for making this a priority. And next, I would like to thank, yes, thank you, Rabbi Kranz. I would also like to thank all of our community sponsors. What's really amazing about Shabbat Together is that in the spirit of inclusion and reminding us that as a community, we have so much work to do to keep everyone included. This is really a beautiful community sponsored and partnered event. And I want to thank all of our community organizations that joined on tonight and that are sharing this with their community members. And in specific, I would like to thank the Weinstein JCC for being one of our main partners for the last few years. And I would like to introduce Melissa Bunce, who is the Director of Youth, Family, Camping, and Support Services. Missy, can you please take us to the next portion of our show?
I can. Thank you, Sarah, and good evening, everyone. I am Missy Bunce, and for those of you who are low vision, I am a white female with curly brown hair. I am sitting at my desk. I am wearing a pink shirt with green camo pants. And as Sarah said, I'm the Director of Youth, Family, and Camping and Support Services at the Weinstein JCC. We strive every day to provide inclusive experiences that cultivate a sense of belonging and a welcoming community center for our participants. Inclusion is who we are and it's who we want to be. It's about the language we use and the way we interact. Inclusion is a mindset. one that embraces the intrinsic value of each and every person. Someone once told me that inclusion is more than being in the room, it's being invited to the table. The Weinstein JCC believes in this power of inclusion, and we are committed to helping our community become a more inclusive place. And it's through programs like tonight that we are truly able to honor and celebrate inclusion and the diversity of our shared human experience. Please remember that this evening is a webinar format. We are here to listen, so you can see and hear the speakers, but they cannot see. Use your chat box to share your feelings, words of encouragement for our speakers this evening. It is now my honor to introduce the musical Havdalah portion of our program this evening. For those of you who picked up your Havdalah kit from the JCC, now is the time to get it ready. Please join me in welcoming the Krantz family and the Friendship Circle alumni, Marissa Marzak on guitar and Yael Krantz on the keyboard. Take it away, Krantz family.
All right, thank you very much, Melissa. Shavua Tov, everybody. We are going to make Havdalah. The Havdalah service is a beautiful, short, pretty much a two-part service. The beginning part of the Havdalah are words of encouragement and faith. We're leaving the Holy Shabbat and we're going into the mundane weekday. It's dark outside, the stars are out, the sun has set. And so the beginning words of the Havdalah are about having no fear and having faith and knowing that it's going to be great. Even though it's dark outside at the moment, the Havdalah actually quotes from the Purim Megillah coming up, the holiday of Purim, and tells us that soon the world will be once again filled with light and joy and everything is going to be fine. And then we conclude with four blessings actually. The blessings over the wine, the blessings over the besamim, and the blessings over fire, and finally the Havdalah blessing itself. So here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen lai 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 borei peri hagafen lai All right, grab you the summon. Here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei minei besamim lai 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 borei minei besamim lai. All right, strike two matches. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei miorei ha'esh lai 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 borei miorei ha'esh. All right, and now we are up to the last part of the Havdalah service, the Havdalah blessing itself. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavedi bein kodesh lechoy bein lechoshech bein yisiro elohamim bein yai ashimi l'sheishes yimei hamaseh Baruch atah Adonai Amavedi bein kodesh lechoy. Thank you, nicely done.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for always bearing with us, as Zoom is always a fun, exciting experiment, as we all know, to see what happens live. So Yael, Marissa, and Rabbi Kranz, thank you very, very much. That was beautiful. Thank you for setting the tone for the evening. And Shavua Tov, may be a great week. Thank you. You are welcome to also close out your video for the rest of the event and watch. Thank you very much. And like I mentioned with Zoom, Missy, when you were talking, you cut out right at the part where you were mentioning how the order of events are going to go for tonight. So if you, do you want to try and repeat just about the Q&A part?
I could totally do that. My apologies, guys. So this is a webinar format. So we're here to listen, and we are going to use the chat function. Some of you have already chatted us really fun things. So that's your way of connecting with us about anything that you want to say, thoughts or feelings as you hear our speakers speak about their experiences. And then at the end, you guys will have an opportunity to connect with us through chat in a more formal way. So that's, I think, what I was going to say before I cut out. I apologize.
No worries. Thank you very much. That was great. We got you just in time. Perfect. All right. And I want to add one thing that I did not mention at the outset of this event, which is that this is being hosted by Friendship Circle of Virginia. So that's a minor detail that I missed. So I also didn't do my introduction. So I am Dr. Sarah Kranz-Cement. I am the director of Friendship Circle of Virginia here in Richmond. And this is an incredibly exciting event. And the reason that Friendship Circle is promoting an event about inclusion is because we are a local nonprofit organization that focuses on building an inclusive community, one friendship at a time. And how apropos is it that we go to our friends really to listen, right? We don't want our friends to tell us what to do. We don't want them to ever tell us we did anything wrong. We just want them to say, you're amazing. That's so hard. I'm so sorry. We just want them to be there to support us. And so an event like tonight, where we are highlighting inclusion in every way and highlighting listening as the beginning of what inclusion is really all about the beginning of supporting someone, is really listening to what they need. It is really a very, very fitting event and an exciting opportunity for Friendship Circle with our partners to bring this to our community. Without further ado, I would like to begin our panelist discussion for tonight. We are going to, the format of the evening is going to be that I will introduce the speakers one by one, and they are each going to share with us the one thing they wish you knew. Some of it will be a little bit more question and answer, but in short, we are going to get to hear their perspective and their experience. I would like to introduce, and we can have their bios come up on the screen so you get to see a little bit about them. I would like to begin with our first speaker of the night, Daniel Staffenberg. Daniel, and sometimes I call him Danny, others call him Daniel, is the CEO of the Richmond Jewish Federation. And he is relatively new to town, but by now an old timer. And we are really excited to have him here. And we're going to leave his bio up here for a few minutes as he begins talking, so you can read more about him. Daniel, you and I talked when you first moved to town and when I was meeting you for the first time, and you told me something about you and your perspective when it comes to inclusion and why this is important to you. And if you had to share your personal experience and your journey with our community about inclusion, how does this relate to you? And can you share that with us tonight?
Of course, and thank you, Sarah and Friendship Circle, for your partnership and for always working on behalf of our community in so many wonderful ways. Thank you for including us. If I can, I'm going to take a little bit of a personal prerogative and just recognize that something like tonight, where we're listening to each other, where we've been asked to share deeply about ourselves, is not easy, even in normal times. To be vulnerable, place our trust in each other, and share our personal stories. I want to thank Judith, who I'm honored to be on a panel with, and Jeff as well, equally honored. Reading your bios, I'm not so sure that I'm up to snuff, so I'm glad I'm going first. And thank you for taking that leap. I'm excited to hear from each of you. I also want to recognize that the last couple of years, our ability to listen and lean into each other has really been ripped away. We've been subjected to a box on a screen, and all of our emotions, as my dog's about to bark, I'm sure, all of our emotions have been wrenched by so much unknown. So I'm really honored and excited to share tonight. So Sarah, you asked me that one thing I wish you knew, and that is that inclusion is part of me because I have been blessed to be the son and been influenced by two amazing parents, both of whom had their challenges and lived with a variety of disabilities. My mother had epilepsy, fairly serious, and often was unable to drive or work, but I'll tell you, was the main influence on my life in so many ways. A Jew by choice, someone who came to Jewish life with more gusto than I have seen in my 20+ year career. I also had a father who, who's a 40-year Federation and JCC professional, who also had a disability, was born with cerebral palsy. That said, as I looked back and I was thinking about the challenge you put to me of how deep do you want to go, how much do you want to share, and the reality was it's not so hard to go deep because I saw their lives as a gift to me, and it framed an ability to understand that nothing is impossible and everyone and everything has a place in our community. My father was told very early on, or his parents were told very early on, not going to amount to much, not going to, be able to do much. And yet he had a 40-year career that I only dream of trying to match at some point, working and building community for 40 years. My mother, as I said, I think I was thinking a lot about what you said, Sarah, in a story to try and bring home what she instilled in us. And the story that came was, I think I was 7 or 8 years old, and we were rushing through, and my mother, while I counted myself as an athlete at the time, my mother was not so much of an athlete. We were kind of rushing through the O'Hare airport to catch a plane between 2 different planes, and she fell and had a seizure. And I had hundreds of opportunities to support her through her seizures. Not an issue. We knew what to do. Let her do her thing, be there to support her. You can imagine in the O'Hare airport as an 8-year-old, I was whisked away. The security guard showed up and started to try and take care of mom. They didn't know what the heck they were doing. And I made sure I told them, because as they were trying to put something in her mouth so that she wouldn't swallow her tongue, which is not what you do, they had pushed me out of the way. And I guess when she came to, she describes a scene where I was being held back, little 8-year-old, by a security guard. And she asked, what happened? Well, ma'am, your son punched one of our security guards because we were trying to help you. And he said, don't do that, and punched one of the security guards. And the story there was, mom got up. Those of you that have been around somebody with epilepsy, they're exhausted, but they're able to move along. We started walking to our gate, and mom basically told the security guard, the 8-year-old had brains that you didn't have, so we're on our way. And it was that moment, I think, that stuck with me, because it was a blessing that I got to live and be mentored and guided and cared for by 2 people who were so full, even with some of the challenges they lived with. And I was thinking, and I'm often asked, and I know my mother was often asked, would you change anything? And the reality was, she always said, no, I'm perfect the way I am. I've got some different challenges. I've got some different opportunities, but I wouldn't have lived the life I lived, and I'm confident my father would say the same, without being my whole self with all of my challenges. And I guess the last piece for me was, and again, to tie it back to the crazy last 2 years that I don't think any of us ever planned to live through. We've all been given different challenges in life. We've all been, whether it be emotional, physical, mental, etc., been challenged in one way. And being able to find those people, whether they be family, friends, or in our side, a community that you're building, Sarah and Missy, to lean on and support each other is what it's all about. And that's a long way. I'm not so sure if that was a story worth sharing, but the one thing I want the group to know is that I wouldn't trade anything about my life or who I was parented by either.
Thank you, Daniel. That was very beautiful and insightful. Your mom sounds like a very strong woman. I have maybe a question that you can choose to answer or not, but that experience that you had growing up, which I'm sure that was only a tiny little sliver of all your experiences, has that impacted you as a community leader? You have a very specific role and a pretty wide lens of the Jewish community for sure, and probably of the Richmond community at least. Has that impacted you in any way that you care to share?
I think 100%. I think you and I first met standing outside an elevator at Advocacy Day. And it's one of those things that I don't often share, but when you shared with who you were and what you were about, it made that connection. And I think, for better or worse, I grew up in this community. I grew up, and I'm looking at Judy specifically. I know a dynamic advocate for our entire community. I remember specifically, and I still carry it today, I was part of a campaign in Calgary, Canada, where I grew up, to try and change disability, D-I-S, to D-Y-S, disability, because as I was explained by the time, DIS means unable to, or you're not, or you're broken, and DYS means, yeah, I can do it, just has a little challenge to it. And I try and bring those to everything we do. The Federation, the community, the JCC, all of our synagogues, and what draws me to Richmond is that I haven't met a single place that isn't trying to do better on the inclusion factor, trying to be a place for everybody. And I remind that because it's not easy always to think of the other first and to do the listening first.
Thank you very much. I remember that day in the elevator. And one of the things that we were advocating for, if it was that day or another one, was actually for, especially during COVID and in general, for there to be an advocate that is allowed to accompany someone who is nonverbal in the hospital, because that was a whole nother thing. A lot of people don't know what to do in the hospital, even though that is part of their job. So different discussion for a different time, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Our next speaker comes to us tonight all the way from, I don't know if you're there now, but from Washington, D.C. And I cannot do any amount of justice in regard to introducing the Honorable Judith Heumann, who I am so excited and humbled to be able to talk to this evening and to join us. I know COVID has come with a lot of terrible things, and one of the positive things is that we get to have people like Judy come from anywhere in the world and Zoom in, and we get to listen. So Judy, as I mentioned to you when we talked, you and I met also at a Jewish Disability Advocacy Day on Capitol Hill many years ago, before the world turned upside down. And that for me was a privilege at the time. And I said at the time, I would love to bring you to Richmond. And it was too hard to figure out how to do it. And yet finally, here we are. So Zoom has accomplished some good things as well. But again, Judy, I'm not going to give you your full introduction, but very, very short. A disability advocate, internationally known, has been, I believe, her whole life, and it was appointed as the Disability Advocate Advisor to the White House, as far as I know. Has a Netflix series that highlighted her called Crib Camp, is an author, and so many more things. You can read more about Judy on the screen. We're going to leave that up for a few minutes, and then feel free to Google her after this is over. Judy, on your end, like I said, this has been something that you've been living with and advocating for your entire life. And tonight is specifically a Shabbat Together, where we're kind of focusing a little bit on the Jewish community and how we can be more supportive. Is there something that you would like to share with us as it relates to your experience as a person with a disability in the Jewish community throughout your life? Is there something that you would like to share?
Thank you very much. Let me just say that I am not an advisor to the White House right now. I was in the Obama administration when I was the special advisor through the State Department. I do obviously support President Biden and have done work on committees and such, but there is another woman now who has the title of advisor from the State Department, and her name is Sarah Minkara. She's great. So thank you very much for putting this together. And I think exactly as you were saying, Sarah, in the beginning, National Disability, Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month shouldn't be a month. It should be something that in the Jewish community we see as something which is intrinsic to enabling us to ensure that all Jews, including those with disabilities, can feel welcome and able to participate equally within our communities. Thank you for pinning the interpreter. Like some of you in the audience, well, first let me say, for those who are blind or low vision, I am a white disabled woman. I have brown shoulder length hair with red glasses. I'm wearing a t-shirt that says disability is diversity. And my husband's in my apartment, and we have a lot of pictures of family members. Looks like a very European Jewish home when you come in. But also I'd like to say, you know, being a disability rights activist and being a Jew with a disability, I'd like them to be able to meld together. And I think there's some very good work, quite frankly, that has been being done over the last number of decades, but ultimately really enabling true relationships between disabled and non-disabled people in our communities is the same as within general society. We're still too absent in a positive way. The Jewish community, through groups like the Jewish Federation and others, is very much, and I'm not being critical of this, driven towards services, providing supports for people that are needed. But it doesn't really address the issue of full inclusion. And honestly, I've heard from too many disabled people who are working in JCCs around the country where they still feel that they're marginalized, that the role that they would like to be able to play to truly ensure that activities within the Jewish community are meaningfully accessible, but also meaningfully inclusive. And for me, meaningfully inclusive goes beyond what should be the basics. The basics should be that we hold events in places that are accessible, that when we're doing Zoom events, we're ensuring accessibility like we're seeing tonight, where we have captioning and a sign language interpreter. But let me say that, you know, when you think about the number of sign language interpreters who are also fluent in Hebrew, we have basically none. There's been no work that's been done, as far as I know, to really look at supporting the development of sign language interpreters who can do English and Hebrew. So for example, in the services that we have in our synagogues or wherever they're being held, they're English and Hebrew. It is very difficult to find interpreters who are fluent in English and Hebrew. And so, in my view, disabled people who are deaf and hard of hearing do not have the same choices. They may feel very comfortable in going to one or two synagogues where there are larger numbers of deaf people that congregate. And in an urban area, that's something that you can do. But in a non-urban area, it's more difficult. Zoom allows things to be more accessible. So people who might be coming on to Zoom being able to have services captioned as well as interpreted would be great. But I go to a synagogue at Israel, and it's not much different than I'm sure many of the synagogues that you go to. And we have much more at our synagogue beyond services on Friday night or Saturday or high holidays. We have lots of activities that go on. And we have no real way of systemically advertising so that if a deaf person, as an example, wanted to come, they would be able to come and ensure that they would be able to have appropriate supports. So I feel like, you know, while Zoom has been a great opportunity, which it has, as well as keeping us apart, which is obviously not great. I'm an extrovert, but I do think that we need to be really looking at what does it mean to be inclusive. And for example, at Addis, we have a social action committee. Lots of synagogues have something like a social action committee. One thing that we've recently done is the Disability Task Force has moved under the Social Action Committee. The reason we did that was because the Social Action Committee deals with issues like homelessness or refugees or gun violence or whatever it may be. And disability was absent in all those discussions. And what we were saying was, when you look at issues like homelessness, you see the vast majority of long-term homeless people are disabled individuals. So we need to ensure that in work that we're doing to help others, that we're taking the expertise that we have from within the disability community and link it up with other work going on. I also need to say that we need to move more away from the charitable approach, because I still think we're too much in the charitable approach. And I'm not saying don't have JCCs or federations, but what I am saying is inclusion is more than bringing somebody a meal or whatever it may be that one is helping people with. Inclusion really means that we really have an understanding of what is keeping people from meaningfully participating. This is not just a disability issue, but I see it as people are getting older and maybe moving to other places and no longer coming to our synagogues. Is there a way that we could make that different so that we could be ensuring that older people who needed a ride, and I know we have rides and different things like that, that some people can do, but you noticeably see certain groups of people that start kind of vanishing from our synagogues. They still may get a Mishabara call and on, but they're no longer as meaningfully participating as before. I also need to say, Daniel, I'm sorry I disagree with you on the issue of language. So I think there are two terms now that the disability community is looking at. One of them, or adopting, one is disabled people and the other people with disabilities. I think we are really trying to take the word disability, which for me means I can't walk. That's fine. Someone may be blind or have epilepsy or diabetes, whatever it is a part of who we are. But I want people not to look away from the totality of who I am. And so playing around with all these words really, in my mind, also keeps people away from discussing the real issues. Because people will say, so what do you want me to call you? And I'm like, Judy is fine. How do you want to identify me? I'm a disabled person. If you want to use people with disabilities, fine. But please don't get into using any of these other words, which confuse people and even those who have disabilities, because it goes with, we need to understand that most people acquire their disabilities as they're getting older. Your mother, your father, myself, we had our disabilities when we were very young. So it's just who we were. But many people in their teens and their 20s, and then as they get older, are acquiring disabilities with a great deal of shame and stigma. What I want to do, what we want to do, is really normalize disability. We want to see us, hear us, have us doing commentaries, really looking at what are the effects, for example, of in the environment. What is environmental pollution causing? It's causing disability, amongst other things. But once those people have acquired their disability, or long COVID, or whatever it is, we don't want people going back in the shadows and being embarrassed about the fact that they now are going to need help to do things for a shorter, longer period of time. We want people to be able to speak up about who they are, what they need. And instead of feeling sorry for us, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong in recognizing that when one's life changes, it can produce a lot of stress. But it is to recognize that the issue of disability and exclusion is something within our power to change. Within the Jewish community, it definitely is within our power to change, but also to be a model for the rest of the community.
Thank you, Judy. I want to share a story, and then I want to follow up with one more question for you. I mentioned that ShabbaTTogether is the fourth annual ShabbaTTogether, and the point of it was to highlight this discussion. And then the goal is that it shouldn't be the weekend, and it should rather be a launch pad for figuring out what inclusion really means in each community and how to do that better. And I want to just share a quick story. About 2 years ago, in talking about Shabbat Together globally, we had I had worked on sending this campaign out, not just in Richmond, but also globally. And there was a synagogue that got an email and it said Shabbat Together, a weekend of inclusion. And then there was a whole a bunch of details in the email about what they can do that weekend in their community and how they can celebrate and be involved. It turns out that a few weeks later, I got a phone call from a Chabad rabbi who was in South America, I believe. And he said to me, it was before the high holidays, and he said, I want you to know that I don't really understand much about this discussion. And I know that we're supposed to do it. I know what it means. And we do it, of course, when it comes up. But he said, I saw your email that had the word inclusion in the subject. And I have to be honest, I never opened it, he said. But he said, on the high holidays, we got right before Rosh Hashanah, we got a phone call from a local small Jewish deaf community that we didn't even know existed. And he said they asked if they could come to Shul on Rosh Hashanah and if they could hear the shofar. And he said, for the life of me, I couldn't understand how the person who was deaf was going to come to Shul on the synagogue and hear the shofar. I couldn't figure out what he meant. But of course, I said, of course we can come. And I was trying to find interpreters, and I made sure that we had someone that could speak whatever native language, I think maybe it was Portuguese, I'm going to mess that up, whatever language they spoke, plus the Hebrew. And to your point, it was a challenge, but they were able to figure it out. And he said, and this individual came into their synagogue, and he said, I started blowing the shofar because I'm the rabbi. And the individual walked up behind me, and I didn't know what was happening. And he walked over as I was blowing the shofar, and he put his hands on the shofar. And he said, and the entire service, you blow the shofar many times on Rosh Hashanah. He said the entire service, he came up, and then one more person came up, and they were holding the shofar every time I blew it the entire service. And at the end of the service, he came over to me and he said, this is the first time as being a Jewish person that I've ever been able to hear and feel the shofar being blown. And that story, I got chills even just saying it, but that story is not just a story, it's an example of why these conversations are so important to have, even though there's so much more to do, just the very start. And I will have you know that that community, by the way, has grown exponentially. And there was an entire Jewish deaf community that now has their own rabbi, their own synagogue, and their own community. They are also involved in community affairs, but they also wanted their own space. And so in that space, there's been an incredible brand new community that kind of came because of Shabbat Together years ago. So a different conversation, which is kind of beautiful. And to that point, you mentioned all the things that we have to work on. I want to ask you a bit of a positive spin to that, which is we need to highlight these things that we need to work harder on as a community for sure. Let me ask you a question. Inclusion, in my experience, has been such a muddied word. We don't always know what it means. We think we do. And to your point and all the things you mentioned, there's so much we still don't know. If you have to define inclusion, if you can, what is it? What does inclusion mean to you? Because it means so many different things to different people. I don't know if you can do that in one word, but I'm going to see if you can.
Excuse me, I want to tell one quick story before I try to do that. When I was working, I believe it was at the Department of Education, I went to a meeting, and it was with a group of people who had intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this gentleman came over to me and whispered in my ear, I was Jewish, or I am Jewish. And I said, oh, so am I. And he said that he wasn't Jewish anymore because he had been put into an orphanage run by the Catholic Church, and they'd been converted. And so I just want to say that, you know, that story always struck me because this man knew that he was Jewish. I offered to go to synagogue with him, and he said, no, thank you. And of course, I never said anything else. But the fact that he came over to me to make that point was very powerful and really made me realize, maybe more than I had, that we really need to ensure that anyone, regardless of who they are, doesn't have their religion taken away from them. or their culture taken away from them because others, for whatever reason, are choosing for that to happen. On the issue of inclusion, these kinds of words change. And I just want to say that for me, it's being a part of, it's really not being tangential, not in a separate building, not in a separate senior home, but together in schools, in Jewish day schools, in Jewish learning. I told Sarah this story last time we spoke about how when I was denied the right to go to school in Brooklyn in the early 1950s, after my mother pushed my wheelchair to the school and pulled me up the steps, and the principal said I couldn't go there. So they looked for another school and they found this Jewish day school, which is not what they had been thinking about. And my mother called to see if I could be accepted into the first grade. And the principal told her I didn't know enough Hebrew. And my mother had me tutored multiple times a week by a Sabra. And at the end, called the principal up and said, she knows enough Hebrew. And of course, my mother at that time was learning to become an advocate and did not realize that there was no intention on the part of this principal to let me in the school, but he thought he would give a statement that she wouldn't be able to realize. And there are many stories like that. I think that, and again, this is many decades ago, and things have been getting better. But I do want to say that we have not removed many of the barriers. So inclusion means we talk to each other, we bring each other in, we learn about what we need to do to make sure we are removing barriers. Even things like having committee meetings at a member's house. If that house isn't accessible, someone who might want to be on that committee and participate can't. So we need to have these various discussions about what does it mean to truly be inclusive. And Jeff, I've talked too long, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Judy. We will come back. Thank you for sharing your perspective. And taking Judy's lead, we will go to our third and final speaker of the night. Jeff Katz has been a board member of Friendship Circle for a little while now, and he is now on to other things, very important things. And he is a member of the community locally here in Richmond, and is a local and national radio show host. And actually, Jeff, you and I only met because I never listened to the radio, but my husband has a long commute to work. And so he came home one day and was like, hey, have you heard of this guy, Jeff Katz? He mentioned all these things, and you should call him because I think he would be a great asset for Friendship Circle. You should get to know him. And so that is actually how I found you and how we actually got introduced. And I am grateful for that initial introduction. So I'm going to ask Jeff to please share his own perspective and his connection to this inclusion conversation with us. You can read a little bit about Jeff while he begins speaking. Jeff, without further ado, can you please share with us the one thing you wish we knew, if there's just one?
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. And I am eternally grateful to your husband for having made the introduction, because I am much better now knowing you and knowing the Friendship Circle of Virginia. When you first approached me about this and asked the one thing that I would like people to know, I was sure that I had it. I was absolutely positive that I would share a story about my daughter, Julia, who's going to be 19 years old in a couple of weeks, and developmentally is still about 18 months old. And I have shared Julia's story time and time again. And when I was a columnist for the Boston Herald, one of my colleagues there went on to my Facebook page. And I was traveling back and forth between Boston and Richmond. And on Julia's birthday, I was here in Virginia, and Julia was back in Massachusetts as we were looking for services and a home and the rest of this. And in the middle of the night, I was feeling awfully sad and missing my family. And I wrote this letter to Julia on Facebook, and I did not think that anybody would care or notice it. And as I said, one of my colleagues at the Boston Herald saw it. And the next thing I knew, the beautiful photo of Julia was on the front page of the Boston Herald. And that story, that letter was shared. I stopped counting at 1 million because I was not a math guy. I was a blue book guy. I didn't want to solve for X. I wanted to tell you how you felt solving for X. So Julia's story has been told time and time again. And I said to Heidi, who is my wife, I said, I'm just going to talk about that. And she said, well, you know, here's the problem with that is that that's not all there is. And I said, well, what do you mean? I mean, you know, Julia is this wonderful gift, and I can talk about how Julia has made me a better man, and I've served on committees and commissions and boards, and her story has touched more people than I have, and all these wonderful things. And my wife looked at me and she said, you know, look, here's the deal. You've got to remember, and you've got to tell people, Julia, first of all, the one thing everybody needs to know is that Julia is a person. And Julia is not a collection of symptoms or disabilities or diagnoses. She's a beautiful little girl and has lovely hair and beautiful eyes and the ability to touch people in ways that most of us don't. And I always go back to the fact that Julia has an appreciation for things that most of us don't. Julia loves a breeze. I mean, she gets a smile on her face like nobody's business. And Julia loves cookies and would prefer cookies to asparagus and things of this sort. And I said, so I've got it covered. And my wife, as Heidi is one to do, said, no, you really don't. Let me explain to you what it is that I'm really saying to you. She says, you got to tell people about the things that Julia doesn't like and the things that Julia does, quite frankly, that are annoying. And I thought, well, no. I mean, this, you know, it destroys everything, doesn't it? I mean, that's terrible. It's ridiculous. And then I started thinking, and I don't mind admitting this fact, Heidi was right. Julia is not a collection of disabilities or diagnoses, but she's also not ideal and perfect. Julia does love cookies and she does love a breeze. But Julia hates getting her hair combed, just like most other small children, and she will let you know she is not happy about it. And it can be difficult to do that. Julia, at 19 years of age, wears diapers. And I got to tell you something, it's not a thrill. That's part of who Julia is, but that's part of who Julia is. It doesn't define who she is. It's simply a part of who she is. The other part of this that I want people to know is that really it is not an all or nothing thing. We've taken this approach, I think, in society where we had time in this country where people with disabilities were essentially warehoused. I had an aunt that I can remember visiting as a small child in Pennsylvania. Today, we would say she had developmental disabilities. At the time, mental retardation was the phrase that was used. And my Aunt Ethel was housed in what looked like a prison. I mean, that's the reality. It looked like a prison, and we would drive up there and we would take my Aunt Ethel out for a day. And at the end of it, when we had to return her to Laurelton, which was the facility, she would cry hysterically. She just didn't want us to go. And that resonates with me. My Aunt Ethel, I'm thrilled to say, was blessed when the idea of group homes came about, and she went and she lived in the community. And this time, even as a small kid, when we went to visit her, she would tell us, look, it's time for you to go, because she had things to do and places to go, and she had her crew that she was going to be hanging with. So that's part of who she was. It's not all or nothing. It's not that we take disabled people and we hide them away, but at the same time, we don't say that people with disabilities are perfect and everything is to be treated in that way. I think it's all about the totality of it. And that applies to those of us who are parents as well. You have some people who say to us, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear about Julia. And all I can think about is the appreciation for the wind and the cookies and the good stuff. But at the same time, we have people who will tell us essentially, oh, you're parents of a special needs child, you're saints. And Heidi said, let them know that's not true. And I said, well, you've got to speak for yourself, because I'm pretty sure I'm pretty close to being an amazing father. And she brought me back down to earth and said, the one thing that everybody needs to know is we talk about people who happen to have disabilities. There are challenges that need to be addressed, as Judith has spoken about, I think, so eloquently and much better than I ever could, because I haven't lived them first person, but I understand the difficulties when you've got a young lady in a wheelchair, a young lady with braces, a young lady who maybe wants to go over there and can't because the floor is not quite right. And I know that there are people like Danny who perhaps now figuratively will punch back against those who are not doing the right things when it comes to members of our community with disabilities and special needs. So the one thing to know, and Sarah knows I'm a talk show host, so one thing, I mean numbers again, but the one thing I think would be biyachad, would be together, together the person, together the community, and together all of the parts that go into making up a thoroughly unique individual who is either typically developing or not typically developing, but regardless is part of our community.
Thank you very, very much, Jeff. Thank you for sharing all the parts and pieces, or at least a slice of all the parts and pieces.
Yeah.
You know, I've been involved in a sort of a leadership role in different capacities, both in Richmond and also internationally, as it relates to communities and inclusion in the last couple of years of my life. And to your point, Jeff, it's been really interesting. I have a niece who has disabilities, and in speaking to her parents and so many other parents, especially, it's been a very fascinating experience on my end, talking about what inclusion means with the things that I think it should mean and the things that I was taught it should mean. And the parents going, listen here, let me tell you what really this looks like, or what this means, or what, and also I don't want to talk about inclusion. I don't want to talk about disabilities. I don't want to talk. And it's been really quite fascinating. Fascinating is really the wrong word, but for me, it's been such a learning experience to listen to those with so many different kinds of lived experiences and so many different perspectives when it comes to this discussion and this life that we share. And there's so much joy, and there's so much pain, and there's hardship, and there's confusion and blessing, and it all comes together. And so, you know, to Judy's point about what do you want to be called, or how do you want to identify, and you know, to Jeff's point, I think that there's the idea really here that inclusion begins with listening. I feel like that's really such a beautiful way to sort of wrap this, not in a bow, but it really just begins with that, right? There's so much to do, but listen to what ask and listen. And you have to be willing to ask, right? We have to be willing to Judith's point, if we get caught up sometimes, and Danny, you mentioned the different terminologies, and that's always such a question. And people will talk to me and be like, oh, I can't say that in front of you. And I'm like, just talk. Because if we don't just talk, if we don't ask, if we don't have the words, the knowledge, the comfortable, if we're not comfortable talking about it, then we can't listen. And so to wrap up, before Missy wraps us up completely tonight, I wanted to ask one last thing of our panelists. If you can give us maybe a 1 or 2 minute, did you learn, I know Jeff, you kind of touched on it, but I'll go back to Daniel to start. Is there something that you might have learned from listening tonight to your fellow panelists that perhaps changed your perspective or added to your perspective in a way that maybe an hour ago you didn't have?
Yes, I mean, one, Jeff's love of his child and the family coming together and recognizing that there is strength also in the challenge. And Judith, I'm going to continue to learn on my language, and I love the fact I typed into the chat. I love the fact that we have a place where we can push back and forth and learn with each other and listen to each other. It was nice to sit and just listen.
Thank you, Daniel. And you took that like a champ, by the way.
Happy.
Judith, do you have something that you were able to hear from your fellow panelists tonight, or the last words that you would like to share with us this evening?
Yeah, you can call me Judy. I appreciated the comments that both Daniel and Jeff made, sharing their stories. Jeff, you have 2 other children. We don't have time now, but also, you know, when you tell your story, it might be interesting to tell it, you know, including your other kids and, you know, as a family, how your daughter Julia enriches the family. I think these kinds of stories are really important for people to hear. And also, I think, I'm sure, Jeff, that your daughter uses personal assistants. And there's a big issue with both having a shortage of people who are available to do personal assistance work. And I'm sure, Daniel, in your work, you experience this also. And both because the work is not seen as valued and because salary and benefits are not appropriate. But not to be partisan, but in the Build Back Better bill, there's $140 billion for personal assistance services for Medicaid eligible people. And it is something that I think, you know, in looking both at what Jeff was saying and what Daniel, I think, was not directly saying, but implying, you know, if we want to really be able to both help families stay together and also enable people to feel valued, like Jeff's aunt. I mean, group homes were a big deal at that point, but now we're even moving away from group homes, that people can be living in their own apartment or an apartment with someone else. For me, what I loved about Daniel's story is how he, again, was very open and honest about his experiences with his mother in particular, but I'm sure with your dad too, and how kids really understand. And I think we don't give children enough credit. I think really engaging with young kids, including disabled kids, in discussions about what we can do better, I think would be very important. And we didn't get tonight to discuss, but I think it's a very big issue. People with psychosocial disabilities have disabilities. People with learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, on and on. Those are disabilities. And, you know, what are we doing in our Jewish day schools, in our programs, learning programs, to ensure that children are getting the right supports so that they can participate in Jewish learning and Jewish activities. There's more work going on with summer camps where disabled kids are being integrated with non-disabled kids. And those are all things in the right direction. What I learned is it's great to hear from other Jewish people who are working on this issue also. And really, personal experiences are so important, and good for you that you punched the guy.
Thank you, Judy. Jeff, we'll leave it to you. Go ahead, anything you can.
Sure. I appreciate Judy asking about my 2 boys, and we don't have nearly enough time to go through all of that. But I think the takeaway, Judy, is that both of my boys at times ignored their sister and were annoyed by their sister because Julia was annoying, not because she had disabilities, but because she was their sister. And that's exactly what happens in every single family in every single place. And I think that's part of this. You know, we probably could do an entire new Zoom, Sarah, based on how families are interacting with the special needs folks, kids in particular. And again, for some of these kids, and I've seen it with Harry, I've seen it with Joe, they need to know they have permission to be annoyed. You know, they don't have to say, oh my God, my sister's disabled and what have you. And I got to tell you, Danny's comments and sharing, I just thoroughly enjoyed. I am a longtime Montreal Alouettes fan, however, so we may have to get together and talk about the Stampeders, what's going on out there in the CFL. But Otherwise, it has been, as always with Friendship Circle of Virginia and anything that Sarah Kranz Cement is involved in, it's been an amazing evening. I thank you for the invite.
And if we could also look at getting rid of the word special needs. For those of you in the media, oh my goodness, I'm gonna forget now. AP has a language guide. And in the language guide a couple of weeks ago, the term special education was defined as a term to preferably not use because of the connotation about what special means. You know, when we think of someone who's gifted, we may say they have special, but even there, we give it a different word. We say gifted. The word special, in the case of disability, usually does not mean good. It means different. And it doesn't mean different usually in a positive way. So I was pretty impressed that AP has put the word special education on the don't use unless it's legislatively, there. And it does get to the bigger point that I'm making about language. So you have a daughter, she's got a disability. She's a good and bad kid like your two boys. But because you don't call your boys special, but they probably are special to you.
I was going to say, Judy, I absolutely do call them special. And it is, again, it's an entirely new meeting that we'd have to address all of that. And you and I think, would have a very good conversation. I'm not sure that I agree with you on that.
You don't have to, but you can invite me to your show.
It's a possibility as well.
This is the fun part about live events. We get the real raw stuff. Here we go.
Absolutely.
And you know what? And this is also the great part about perspective, right? There's a lot of perspective and there's a lot of strong, not just opinion, but real emotion that is tied to this, and very strong, again, perspectives and experiences, and they're important, and they are very, very valuable and important for everyone to hear. So Judy, I want to
Margaret in the chat, Margaret says, get rid of special needs, get rid of handicap. People with disabilities are not special or amazing. They're living with their disabilities.
I hear you. What I've learned in my experience is that parents get to do whatever they want. That's what I have come to. That's what I have learned. For me, that's been my learning experience. But Judy, your perspective as someone with a lived experience and someone with a disability is invaluable. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for taking stances. And I want to close out our night. Before I introduce Missy to close out, I want to just say two things. One is that I would like to share with you all that Friendship Circle of Virginia is having our annual online fundraiser. It's a peer-to-peer fundraiser called our charity campaign. And we are really about building inclusive communities and having these conversations and introducing friends to friends. So to be clear, we don't ever use the term volunteer. And Judy, you mentioned about having a charitable perspective when it comes to these discussions. And we really try very hard not to have that. And we talk about friendship as a basis for what inclusion is. Because when you learn to meet somebody new and have shared experiences, that is how friendship grows. And that is how our community grows and is built. And so during COVID especially, I think it is safe to say now that friendship saves lives. That's our sort of tagline. I know it's not really a tagline, but that's how we've been talking about it over the last few months, in the sense that really, I know for myself personally, Judy, you mentioned you're an extrovert. I'm certainly an extrovert, and being locked away for so long with, on my end, a lot of little kids has been quite a challenge and quite interesting. And thank God it's been getting better and better, but friendship for me has been vital during this time. And I think for our kids, both with disabilities and without, friendship is something that has been necessary and needed. We saw with all the school closings, and for those kids that haven't been able to come back to school, and for those who Zoom was a terrible, terrible, horrible place to be, friendship is really taken, I think, a front and center part of our lives, in the sense of recognizing how important it is that we are not socially distant, right? That we are as distant as we need to be health-wise, and yet as supportive and as close as we can be otherwise. And so I hope you will take the time to donate to Friendship Circle. We are a nonprofit. We don't charge any of our families for anything, or our teens, or our families and their siblings. Everybody is invited to everything we do, and we hope to keep it that way. And so I would like to thank again our panelists for coming tonight. Thank you. And I would like to give it over to Missy to close us out for the night.
Hello. I just wanted to take a minute just to share your sentiment and thank all of our speakers tonight for being vulnerable, for sharing your stories, for helping us understand your lived experience. And I want to thank the audience for actively listening in this practice of listening without responding. It's a practice truly because it's hard for us to do. The chat has been active, so I'm happy about that, but this is really only the beginning. Like Sarah said before, programs like this are a launch pad for a deeper discussion. And so it's my hope that all of you here tonight, zooming in from the comforts of your home or wherever you are tonight, are going to use this experience to guide your actions in creating more inclusive spaces of your own. So if you feel comfortable, and if you have not already shared your thoughts with us, please use the chat to let us know what your plan is to listen more intentionally and to create or help to create a more inclusive world for all of us. And thank you. Thank you, Sarah, for asking the JCC to join this. We are always happy to talk about inclusion and ways that we can do things differently and be more intentional and purposeful about our programs and how we advocate and support for inclusive efforts. So thank you, guys. And we will see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Missy, Judy, Jeff, Talia. Thank you to our interpreter for joining us tonight, and Daniel. We really appreciate it. And again, this is the beginning, but happy Shabbat together. And I hope that we all have a very good week and that we do better where we can.
Shavua Tov, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you very much to our panelists. We're going to leave the chat open for a minute, but our panelists are welcome to hop off. We know it's late. Thank you, thank you, thank you.